Hello world of YouTube and welcome to another Discography Review DX, the segment where I take a look at a band's discography by and large and rank it from worst to best, but in a deluxe sense because they have a huger discography, so I have to switch up the format to something a little different. But before we get to the ranking, the band in question are pioneers in the genre of metal. They're a band that if you like metal to any capacity, you've probably had a phase with this band, and you probably have records that you really like amidst your other own more niche preferences. The band in question, Iron Maiden, a band that you can expect one thing regardless of who's singing in the band with their powerful vocals, who's shredding in the band with their great twin guitar setup, or whoever's playing drums for the band and providing some bombast with some tight grooves, is that you're going to have Steve Harris doing some great backing vocals while fucking laying down the bass. I love Iron Maiden. I think they are a really good band. Now, how many albums am I going to be talking about today? Well, with that being said, let's transition over to the other camera. Iron Maiden have 17 albums in whole that I will be talking about today, which is a lot.
Now, when it comes to talking about Iron Maiden, there's always four eras that people like to mention, but I split that last era into two at this point. You know, you've got the Paul era, which are the first two records. You've got Dickinson's first run, which is from Number of the Beast through Fear of the Dark. You've got the Blaze era, which are their two other 90s records. You've got Dickinson's Return, which are the last six records of their career, but I split that up into two, with Dickinson's Return being from Brave New World through A Matter of Life and Death, and Dickinson's late era being from Final Frontier through Senjutsu. But the big reason why I split the era in half at this point is because with the Final Frontier, the Book of Souls, and Senjutsu, they really doubled down on experimenting with longer, more ambitious song lengths and scope. You know, Brave New World and Through a Matter of Life and Death have their longer song lengths because it's like of the CD era, and similarly to bands like Rush, they just were writing longer songs. But they really, like I said, they really pushed that on those last three records, for better or for worse, if you guys saw my Senjutsu review. But that's, and I'll be talking about each era as they sort of come up, but as always, F to S, I'll highlight my top six records in Maiden's catalog. Now, as far as the bottom of the barrel for Iron Maiden, the worst Iron Maiden record, it's going to be an easy pick. It's going to be from an era that people don't really like all that much, but does still have its defenders. I'm talking about the Blaze era, and I'm talking about an album that is the only album going in F tier. There is only one album going in F tier, because I think one Blaze album is better than the other, and the best Blaze album is about as bad as the worst Dickinson album. But the album going in the bottom of the barrel is Virtual XI. I think Virtual XI is not the best album by a lot of reasons. You know, this album came out in 98, and I feel like during this point in Maiden's career as a whole, the band, and it's a similar problem that the X Factor has, as far as them toying with longer song lengths, doesn't feel all that fruitful with the Blaze era. I was talking to my buddy Scott about this because he's actually a Blaze defender. He doesn't hate the Blaze Bayley era, but he also recognizes that he listens to the Blaze albums in a very cherry-picking experience sort of way. And while I can commend that, because there are songs on even Virtual XI that are not awful, the singles on XI aren't necessarily the strongest songs. Like, yeah, Futural's fine, but The Angel and the Gambler, which is the other single from this album, is not a great track in general. I just don't think it's a very good song. I think it's kind of a dull, longer song on the album. Outside of the clumsy hook work on Lightning Strikes Twice and When Two Worlds Collide, they're decent songs. I just don't think that this album as a whole culminates to anything that I can't get better on any other Iron Maiden record. I'm also not that particular on Blaze's vocal style. Like I said, no matter who's fronting Maiden, you're always going to get big, colossal vocal styles, with the exception of parts of the Paul era, but those are kind of endearing albums on their own merit. I don't think Virtual XI brings as much to the table, given it was their 11th outing, and they just felt like they were sort of running the well dry with the Blaze era, and as far as songwriting was considered, that they bounced back from pretty amicably, but I just don't enjoy Virtual XI all that much. But like I said, that's probably the worst it'll get as far as Maiden is considered, because the X Factor is a little bit better than Virtual XI at a little bit. I mean, the single choices are at least better. I think Lord of the Flies and Man on the Edge are better single type songs than the ones from Virtual XI. I think the pacing of the album is a little whack. I think Sign of the Cross is a song that goes on for like 3 minutes too long. It's not a bad song at its core. It just feels a little drawn out by the end of it, and it's maybe not the best foot for the band to step forward with in this new era. But I mean, the Aftermath is okay, if not a little long in the tooth. The Closer, The Unbeliever's kind of in the same boat. 2 a.m. is a decent song. The band is writing okay songs. Again, similarly to Virtual XI, I feel like I could just get any mood of this done better on any other Maiden record except for Virtual XI. But I can understand, again, somebody liking this record at the very least. It's not a record that I like at all, but again, like Scott said, I don't think that either Blaze record works in an album sitting, because they are kind of long in the tooth, but I could understand people liking some of the songs from this project outside of the, vacuum of an album experience. The production's fine. There's no Maiden album that I think is produced badly, but it's produced competently enough. I like the album cover too. I think the album cover is really nice. I debated on doing a separate tier list tangential to this of the album art, but I may do that for like a tier time sometime. I have it saved as a Photoshop document now so that later I can do it. But yeah, the X Factor isn't like great by any stretch of the imagination. It has the same follies as an album I'm actually going to put next to it in the rankings, Senjutsu. Songwriting on this album, on Senjutsu, like I said in my listening log update, I feel like this album isn't bad at its core. There's some good concepts toyed with, and there's some great songs here that remind me of old Maiden, like Stratego. I think Days of Future Past is another really quality tune. But I mean, hell, the last 3 songs make up over 30 minutes of this 90-minute runtime. The first track, again, is like a 9-minute jaunt that has a slow burn build. This album does not start on its strongest foot. And then a handful of the longer cuts, similarly to the Blaze era, just go on for a bit too long. I don't really enjoy sitting through this record as a whole. Even, I mean, the longer songs do have elements that work. Like I said, the closer Hell on Earth is pretty good. It's at the end of a crawl of some tracks that have some flavor here and there. But like The Writing on the Wall is a track that I really don't like. I don't like the title track all that much because it's slow burn nature. It has a build that I don't think justifies itself. It's an album similarly to Virtual 11, again, that feels like they're running the well a little dry. It just has moments that stand above it and feel more tangential to the X Factor. These are 3 records that I don't feel like you need to get to. I feel like they're definitely maybe cherry-picking experiences, at least in the case of the X Factor and maybe Senjutsu. I'd listen to like the shorter songs in Senjutsu, see if you're jiving with Dickinson's performance and the band as a whole, and see if it'll, entice you to listen to the rest. But I don't think any of these are great starting points for Iron Maiden. I feel like they are points of morbid curiosity at the very least, and cherry-picking experiences at the very most. They're albums that I don't see myself revisiting again after this review is done, because I just don't like them all that much. Especially in the case of Senjutsu. That's a big disappointment because you'll see I like the Final Frontier and Book of Souls a decent amount, and this record just was not up to snuff. Now, an album I almost put down amidst the X Factor and Senjutsu tier, if only because it's easily the most forgettable album in Maiden's entire discography. But upon revisiting it, its highlights stand above them. It's still just mad forgettable. Is No Prayer for the Dying. It's an album that came out amidst a renaissance that the band was thriving in with, Seventh Son of the Seventh Son, Somewhere in Time, Power Slave. Hell, they followed up with an album that's much better than it with Fear of the Dark. No Prayer for the Dying is a record that just exists. Even its highlights, for the most part, sound more like Diet Maiden than they do Iron Maiden proper. Tracks like Tail Gunner, the title track, Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter, which is the one track that kind of transcends and almost sounds like it could be from Seventh Son of the Seventh Son. It's not an album that I feel like many people hold to a high regard in Maine's catalog, which is shocking because, again, it came out during this proverbial golden age for the band themselves. When I was in high school, I went to a yard sale and I bought a box of CDs, and it had all of Maiden's records up to Brave New World on CD. It had every Van Halen record, every Anthrax record. No Prayer for the Dying wasn't amidst that, and I'm assuming it wasn't because somebody bought it by itself, and more the owner just didn't buy the album because it had a compilation in there. It even had the live albums. I had like Made in Japan and all that sort of stuff. But I didn't have No Prayer for the Dying. And that speaks volumes for how forgettable of an experience it is. Because, it's not only just forgettable. When spinning the record, I forgot how bad some of the writing really is. Holy Smoke and Public Enemy #1 are easily like some of the worst pre-Senjutsu Dickinson songs that has ever been associated with his era in the band. The album itself isn't all that great, and the stuff that sticks to you doesn't stick as hard as anything that came out around it. It's an album that I feel like if you enjoy the era that it came in, I'd maybe give it a spin, but I don't expect you walking away with much. While I said that the Blaze era could be a cherry-picking experience for some, ultimately they do feel like a morbid curiosity after getting into Maiden, if you want to see what that era really had going on. No Prayer for the Dying is legitimately like just a cherry-picking experience to me. After this review, I don't see myself spinning anything from it, if not Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter, which is the one song game that I feel like transcends the whole thing. Like The Assassin's fine. Fate's Warning, they're fine songs. But similarly to the Blaze era, I can get any mood from this album done better on any other Maiden record that sits above it. It's not bad, it's just very safe Maiden in a way that almost sounds derivative of itself. It's idiosyncratic in the worst type of ways, which for a band like Maiden, who can get a little idiosyncratic, that is disheartening to say. And another album that I'll be putting in this place, in the D tier with No Prayer for the Dying, is something of a similar ilk for me personally. While I forget No Prayer for the Dying exists, and I feel like the general populace kind of feels with me, it also was an album that's forgettable amidst an era where the band was thriving. A Matter of Life and Death is an album that is forgettable during an era where the band was more sort of solidified as a legacy act. It's their 14th record, for fuck's sake. And again, while they've released stuff that's better than it afterwards, A Matter of Life and Death feels like the band sort of caught up in itself again, like in No Prayer for the Dying. I feel like musically it's a little better than No Prayer for the Dying, but similarly to No Prayer for the Dying, it's an album that by and large sort of goes in one ear, comes out the other. There's stuff that sticks. Like, I like the bass work by and large on this record. I think Steve Harris shines on this project. Tracks like The Longest Day, the opener, Different World, The Pilgrim, all have these just classic Maiden Steve Harris bass grooves that, give the band a foundation to play off of. And while the band's trying to have these lyrical themes throughout it, with like war and religion, they don't ultimately culminate to anything as exciting as the writing on even their Paul era. I feel like the band themselves are sort of writing for the CD era in ways that aren't as gratifying as Dickinson's Return started off at. Again, it's a competent record. The band isn't playing anything horribly, but I can also get outside of the thematic writing as a whole. I mean, I can on the Final Frontier, but I feel like the band just isn't creatively throttling in a trajectory that I feel like is all that engaging with the listener on a matter of life and death. Again, it's a record that I forget exists half the time because its album art isn't as memorable as Dance of Death. It's not as, throttlingly brilliant as Brave New World is. It's just a record that kind of exists in this muddled style of idiosyncrasy. Again, No Prayer for the Dying kind of saw them doing that to almost a derivative degree. A Matter of Life and Death, I feel like, kind of treads that when it comes to Dickinson Return era Maiden. And I feel like similarly to No Prayer for the Dying, it's a record that if you listen to, after listening to records like Brave New World or Seventh Son, you'll find stuff that you like, but I don't think the whole record as a whole will stick with you, which is the problem of all of the records that I've ranked so far. They're not great album experiences. You'll probably find songs that you enjoy because Maiden don't have a record with outright all bad songs, but I don't think that collectively you'll revisit these projects all that much. At least I don't. So I don't think you would, but you might. And you might like these records more than me, and that's fine. That's your opinion. But that's going to round out the D tier, the forgettable tier. You've got Virtual 11, you've got Bloated and Boring, and then you've got Forgettable. Now, what would the C tier culminate to? Well, it's going to culminate to solid enough records in Maiden's catalog. Records that get the job done. And I couldn't think of an album that gets the job done better than Dance of Death. Dance of Death, it's not the only album going in the C tier, but it's certainly an album that's there. It's got great moments. Like I think the 1-2 punch of Wildest Dreams and Rainmaker show the band can keep it tight, can keep it concise, while keeping it large. I think that its follies are honestly similar to the follies seen in the Blaze era in Senjutsu. I think tracks like No More Lies, the title track, and Passchendaele get a little long in the tooth, especially No More Lies. Its hook feels about as bad as like Sign of the Cross from the X Factor. But even in tracks like Dance of Death and Passchendaele, they at least have elements that justify the song length. Again, CD era Maiden was really toying with 8-minute, 9-minute songs, multiple ones on a record, and they don't falter on those. They do them better on other records, but they don't falter on Dance of Death. I think it just helps that the moments where they keep it tight are great, like Montesquieu, Gates of Tomorrow, New Frontier, all fantastic, tighter songs that I think entice the listener or keep them engaged amidst the bigger epics that this album's trying to spice in amidst the track listing. The album art may be ass, but it's a pretty solid Maiden record that I feel like if you enjoy The Final Frontier or Book of Souls, if you enjoy the more ambitious moments on like Somewhere in Time, you'll enjoy Dance of Death. There's some people that don't like Dickinson's Return because it sort of takes ideas from the Blaze era and just transposes Dickinson on top of them. But I feel like with Dickinson fronting the band, they just have this creative energy that works for me. And I think Dance of Death is an example of that, because I feel like if they did put Blaze on Dance of Death, it wouldn't hit quite as hard. But Dickinson sells the tighter moments with his belts, and he gets into the gravitas of the dramatics a little bit better than Blaze does. And I think that Dance of Death is a solid record that is a good point of curiosity. Not a point of morbid curiosity. It's just a point that I feel like you should get to if you're enjoying some of the stuff that is in later Dickinson era Maiden. It's a point that I feel like you should get to. And a record that I feel like sort of embodies the same kind of ideas of Dance of Death as far as like a Maiden album that sort of pushes their own, spreads their wings a little more, and sticks the landing in a solid enough way is Book of Souls. It's a record that's as long as Senjutsu, but is far, far better than Senjutsu as far as utilizing longer song lengths while having these tighter, typical Maiden jams sprinkled throughout. I feel like the Black and the Red and the title track are pretty good. Even the closer, while the closer Empire of Clouds is a bit much, it is an 18-minute jam written by Iron Maiden. They at least utilize it a little better than anything on Senjutsu. And tracks like Speed of Light, Death or Glory, Tears of a Clown, all those songs at least feel like tight Maiden jams. They don't stick out quite in the same way that tracks like Stratego do on Senjutsu. Everything kind of fits a little more cohesively on Book of Souls and creates a more unified listening experience that I feel like is far more rewarding for the listener in a similar vein of Dance of Death. I like Book of Souls a lot when it came out. I liked that it sort of, again, saw them spreading their wings more than what they did on Final Frontier as far as utilizing longer song lengths and more dynamic topics and stuff like that. But I enjoy a lot of what Book of Souls has, and I feel like if you enjoy this era of Maiden, if you're liking what you hear on Brave New World or Final Frontier, or even if you listen to Dance of Death, I feel like Book of Souls is very much worth your time. I feel like the production, it just works better for the band than it does in Senjutsu, and I feel like, and again, it shows that a band at this point in their career could still write some really solid jams without getting too bogged down in their own shit. It's an album I'd equate to Rush's Clockwork Angels as far as sticking the landing is considered, because Clockwork Angels is Rush's sole concept record, and it comes across pretty gracefully. Given Maiden was toying with longer song lengths dating back to the Blaze era and continuing to expand upon that throughout Dickinson's Return, this sticks the landing far better than it could have potentially done so, especially given Senjutsu followed this up. It's a double album that is beefy, but I feel like Maiden utilizes that incredibly well on here. Given I have a show called Redacted, where I kind of do that sort of thing, bring together double albums. Book of Souls, sure, I could probably redact it someday, but it's lower on the totem pole as far as double albums that I feel like need a good redacted. It's easy. It's very easy for a band like Maiden on their 16th record to fall into the same follies that they do on Matter of Life and Death or No Prayer for the Dying, as far as sounding like idiosyncratic, boring Maidenisms. But I feel like Book of Souls is much more engaging with the listener than No Prayer for the Dying or Matter of Life and Death. I feel like it's much more fun just in general. When The Great Unknown finally releases from its like almost 2-minute build-up, I feel like it's still just a great listen. I don't know. I think Book of Souls is pretty solid, and I feel like it justifiably belongs in the C tier for all the bad that the records below it do. I feel like it's still a fun listen at the end of the day. Similarly to Dance of Death, the album art's much better, but it's still a fun listen. Now, as far as the B tier, these are the records that I feel like are very much worth your time as a whole listening experience. Dance of Death and Book of Souls are sort of points to get to eventually. They're records that I feel like if you like other records, you should get to those as far as a whole album experience. But the B tier is when we're getting to records that I think are genuinely just great or really good. We're treading on that great territory here. And I almost put it in the C tier, but Final Frontier, I'm ultimately putting in the B tier, if only because I really dig the sounds on this record. I think that Satellite 15 is a much better, like, beefier opening track that bleeds into the El Dorado, the single, very well. And El Dorado feels like just ripped out of early Dickinson era in a similar way to Stratego, but it's not on a record that sucks. It only leads into a string of just hit after hit after hit with Mother of Mercy, Coming Home. The Alchemist also kind of almost sounds like Paul era Maiden again, and I fucking love it. While this album may seem a little front-loaded because a lot of the tighter songs are in the front half, the back half is no slouch for the band taking longer songs and making them work in a successive fashion. You know, I think Isle of Avalon and Starblind, while seemingly being a little samey in their structure, they're still really fun, epic, big songs. I think the Talismans comes in at a nice, refreshing time as well. The album just knows when to switch it up, when to switch up sonic dynamics in the best way possible. You know, and I feel like even if you just like the front half, that front half is so good on the Final Frontier, man. You know, I can understand people getting sick of the album by the end of its runtime because, again, the back half, it's got a lot of longer songs in it, and I can see that being kind of boring for some people. If you just want tight, lean Maiden, if you want that early era Maiden, you know, you're probably not going to like the back half of the record. Or if you're just a fan of older Maiden, you're not going to like the back half of this record. But I enjoy it. As a fan of stuff like Power Slave and Somewhere in Time and Brave New World, I feel like Final Frontier is still good at doing that engaging long stuff that they were toying with the Blaze era ultimately to start, but thrived with during the Dickinson's return. Even if I put everything in that era below this, I feel like the Final Frontier was a great culmination of what the CD era was aiming for while transitioning into even longer song lengths and even more progressive song structures in a way that was all the more gratifying on the Final Frontier. It's a really good record, and I feel like if you enjoy some of the stuff from Power Slave, like if you like tracks like Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Alexander the Great, if you enjoy Seventh Son of the Seventh Son, I would definitely listen to the Final Frontier at the very least, because I feel like it's a record that is so very good, for it being the band's 15th record, it could have easily shat the bed. And could have been the start of an awful decade for the band. But I feel like they started the 2010s off on the best foot with the Final Frontier. Similarly so, I feel like Brave New World started off Dickinson's return in all the best ways. You know, the album kind of feels structured in a reverse way to a lot of what I've talked about so far as like beefy song, then like a bunch of tight cuts, or at least some tight cuts sprinkled in with some longer tracks like on Dance of Death or Book of Souls. The track itself starts off with this razor sharp, just welcoming back of Dickinson with the Wicker Man before going into the bigger epics like Ghost of the Navigator, the title track, and Blood Brothers. But those tracks are fan-fucking-tastic. This record is a concise, well-constructed record that saw, again, the band taking the expansive, I guess, song structure and songwriting ideas from the Blaze era and kind of Fear of the Dark, and just making them work even more so with Dickinson in the band. You know, it's the band writing for the CD era in a band that in a way that I think works for them. You know, to throw another comparison to Rush, you know, what they were thriving on with pockets of, you know, snakes and arrows are also kind of channeled on Brave New World in a much more gratifying manner. You know, I enjoy a lot of the imagery and a lot of the lyrics. You know, I like the writing on this record more so than I have on any record that's come below this. You know, I enjoy Brave New World a lot, and I feel like it's a record that feels like it was tailor-made for the CD era, given how well everything kind of flows together. You know, how, again, similarly to Final Frontier, they know when to spice up the record in all the right ways at all the right times. I feel like this album is pretty stinking good. You know, again, its back half feels a bit even more so dense than its front half, but I feel like, again, similarly to Final Frontier, the band just makes it work. Like, Dream of Mirrors is a fantastic track that doesn't really feel like it's reaching the 10-minute mark. The Closer, Thin Line Between Love and Hate, very similar. It's a track that doesn't feel like it's 8.5 minutes long, and yet it very much is, and I don't mind that about it. You know, I like a lot of what they're working with on Brave New World, and I feel like it again, it brought Dickinson back in a lot of really, really good ways, and I think that it's a great record, and I feel like, again, if you enjoy the longer ideas from Dickinson's early era, I would give Brave New World a spin. Similarly to Final Frontier, they're records that I feel like are much more worth your time than everything that's come before it, obviously, but I feel like even more so if you enjoy them penning these big epic tunes. These two records are very much worth your time for very similar reasons. It just shows them utilizing progressive song structuring and cool writing much better than on Book of Souls and Dance of Death. So the last song I'm going to put in the B tier for a very different reason than Final Frontier and Brave New World, because I don't think it's like similar to those in being a better use of like progressive song structuring. Fear of the Dark is also going to go in the B tier. I used to fucking love this record a lot more than I do now. I still really like it, obviously, and I feel like it's a bit underrated in the grand scope of the early Dickinson era and Maiden's discography by and large. But I really enjoy a lot of what this record has going on. You know, I think the 1-2 punch of Be Quick or Be Dead and From Here to Eternity is a great way to lead the record off. I think Fear is the Key has a good sinister lead, or has some good sinister leads. I think Judas Be My Guide's a nice tight song. I think the title track obviously slaps and I think is easily the best song on the record. You know, but I think that by and large this record works in a realm that is better than No Prayer for the Dying, if only because the songs feel a bit more memorable. You know, while it does have some tracks I don't think work quite as well, I don't necessarily like Chains of Misery all that much. And I think Wasting Love feels like a power metal hair ballad written in 1992. A majority of Fear of the Dark still works in a lot of really good ways that I feel like if you enjoy, you know, Peace of Mind and Number of the Beast, or even Killers, you'll enjoy aspects of. You know, I know that there's some people out there that don't really like Dickinson's Return, partially probably because they do toy with these longer song lengths, and I feel like for it to be the last leaner main record, it's still not like super lean, it's still like almost an hour in length, but I feel like it sits through its runtime pretty amicably, and I feel like fans of classic Maiden shouldn't sleep on Fear of the Dark because there's more merit to it than I feel like some people give it credit. I used to say it was my favorite Maiden album, but that's when I was just an edgy little shit. It's still a good record, but it's nowhere near their best. It's just ultimately a record that sits below these seven because these seven records are just fan-fucking-tastic heavy metal music. But the one that I like the least of them all, that's going in the A tier, is Somewhere in Time. You know, if you're talking Dickinson era, throttling in a creative pocket so incredibly well, if you're talking about the band just capitalizing on what made Power Slave and Peace of Mind great in a nice, well-constructed package, Somewhere in Time is that. You know, whether it's the bops like Wasted Years or Sea of Madness or Stranger in a Strange Land, with that classic Steve Harris bass work, to the epics like Deja Vu or Alexander the Great or the opener Caught Somewhere in Time, you can't really go wrong with this record. And if you're listening to the Dickinson era, it's just a record that you just throw on while listening to it, because it's still the band channeling some really great tunes with some razor-sharp guitar work and some great soaring vocals over it. It's the embodiment of what made the Dickinson era great. It's just shy of my top 6, if only because the writing on the Paul era and these Dickinson records are just that much of a step above. You know, Somewhere in Time is still obviously a fantastic record and worthy of being up there as one of the greats in Maiden's discography. It's just not quite in my top 6, but it's still very much worth your time. It's still classic Maiden, thriving in the best way possible. Now, as for my number 6 pick, I was kind of torn on what I wanted to put next. There were 2 records I was kind of fighting out for the bottom of my top 6, but the record I ultimately put in this spot is in its spot, if only because the era that it's in is so tight, and I got no beef with it, and I really enjoy it a lot. So instead, of putting the self-titled record in the 6th spot, I'm going to put Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. I think it's a great follow-up to Somewhere in Time. I feel like it capitalizes on a lot of what that record has going on in spades. While Somewhere in Time felt like it was building off of Power Slave, Seventh Son feels like it's building off of Somewhere in Time, and Somewhere in Time is a pretty decent foundation for this record to spring from. I love how haunting this record kind of feels. It has a similar soundscape to Somewhere in Time, but utilizes it a little better. It's a bit airy. It's a bit spooky at points. Something that they would toy with in Fear of the Dark as well. But I feel like tracks like the hooks on Can I Play With Madness and The Evil That Men Do are so great. Dickinson soars on that. But I also really love the opener, Moonchild. Again, the Clairvoyant has just this great bass work and build-up in it that just feels like classic Maiden in the best way possible. I really enjoy Seventh Son for all that it does better than Somewhere in Time. I feel like it's not as tight as the records that come before it, but it's not quite pushing the bridge, pushing the sonic boundaries for the band that the records in the B tier were, or at least the beefier records in the B tier were. It's still a really great record though, and I feel like it's easily just another classic in an era of classics for this band that I think is great. It may sound a little hard for me to praise Maiden when it comes to talking about the stuff that works, because Maiden are one of those bands that kind of just have this signature sound, and when it works, it just works so very well. And Seventh Son and Somewhere in Time are just embodiments of a band having a comfort zone and knowing how to thrive in it. For all that I think Number of the Beast, Peace of Mind, and Power Slave did to lay the groundwork for the Dickinson era especially, I feel like these two records, more so than Fear of the Dark, show what made that era work in a lot of really good ways. I think that these are very tight, concise, by the numbers Maiden projects, but in the best way possible. But none of that would matter if they didn't have a great foundation to build upon with their self-titled debut, which is my number 5 record in the ranking. And I think people are of two minds of the Paul Di'Anno era of Maiden. I think everybody respects him, but some people just don't like it as much as the Dickinson era. I really enjoy the Di'Anno era, if you could not tell. And I feel like this debut just did so much to create the identity of Iron Maiden as a band. It's got its songs that kind of tread on beefier territories. Really, there's only one, Phantom of the Opera, but that song in general feels like the archetype with which Maiden would build a lot of their scale on. Because a lot of this record's lean. You got Prowler, Running Free, Transylvania, which is a great, Halloween instrumental, but even the title track, the band's namesake song, Iron Maiden, all just lean, well-constructed hard rock songs with some great guitar work, some great bass grooves laden in there, and some really good vocals cutting through that mix. There's a sense of rawness and primalness to this album that I feel like makes it worth of a listen. So I mentioned this later in the review, but I do feel like there's some merit to starting with this record and working with their discography in chronological order. I don't think it's necessarily the best starting point, but I do feel like you do get some enjoyment out of the Di'Anno era if you start with the debut and just see where this band, who's had a multi-decade run, got its foundation. There's some charm in starting there, you know what I mean? Well worth your time. It's a fantastic record that has them really just harnessing, again, a sound, making it work, and again, laying the groundwork, not only for their sound and where they would go sonically, but for a whole scene. I feel like this record and Killers did a lot to help shape the metal scene, and I really enjoy this debut for doing that. I feel like it's a classic. It's a classic metal record that, similarly to Van Halen's debut, helped shape the 80s as a whole for a genre. And I respect that for it. And I feel like it's a record that people do kind of sleep on, not to the same degree as like Fear of the Dark or even maybe Seventh Son of a Seventh Son and Brave New World, but it's a record that as time has gone on, I feel like people, I wouldn't be surprised if people don't talk about it as much, just because the Dickinson era feels like the sort of go-to point for people. But the Di'Anno era should not be slept on, and that'll come more evident with my higher ranking of Killers. But I enjoy the debut for what it does. I feel like it's the best foot for Iron Maiden to step forward with, by and large, and I feel like it is a fantastic record. Now, above it, just a notch above it, is not Killers. I really, really like Killers, guys. In fact, when I was respinning it for this review, I fucking fell right back in love with it in a way that I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. But because of that, I'm going to put Peace of Mind next up in the ranking. It's the last album putting in the A tier. These three are all going to be S tier records. But Peace of Mind is a record that I feel like could have ended up in the same vein of No Prayer for the Dying, if not for what makes this record thrive. Because I'll be honest, I don't listen to Peace of Mind quite as much as Number of the Beast or Power Slave, or even Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. But again, similarly to Killers, when revisiting it for this review, I forgot just how many bops were on this record in a way that No Prayer for the Dying did not give me. It's got Flight of the Icarus and the Trooper, easily two of the best Dickinson-era lean rock cuts. The bass on Trooper is iconic. Where Eagles Dare is an incredible opener that is similar to Power Slave as far as sheer scale setting. But the deeper cuts on this record are also fan-fucking-tastic. The 1-2 punch of Quest for Fire and Sun and Steel show their ability to write lean, catchy, throttling rock tunes with, again, great bass at their core. Everything that makes Iron Maiden great still exists on Peace of Mind as a whole. It's a record that I overlooked in a lot of ways that I shouldn't have. But it's one that I do think holds up as one of their best, if only because it's everything that makes Power Slave, Number of the Beast, and Killers and their debut fantastic. It's just more of that. Again, the songwriting on these three is better, but it's still an essential piece of Maiden's discography that has some singles that stand as some of their best songs, period. And I feel like, again, if you're listening to Dickinson Iron Maiden similarly to Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son, I would just throw it on your rotation and just integrate it into your listening experience. Again, I don't know if this is necessarily a starting point, but it's very much a place to get to when listening to Maiden. This whole tier is basically that. It's very much places you should go, if not starting there, because I could see somebody starting at their self-titled debut and working their way through the discography in chronological order. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that with Iron Maiden. I feel like they're a band that warrants that kind of listening experience for those that want to go through that. You'll find stuff that you don't like, you'll find stuff that you do like, you'll find stuff that you like more than others, and you can see it all built from that initial debut. But I could see somebody starting with Killers, Numbers, or Power Slave equally as much, but I feel like the first album I've talked to that is easily a starting point would be the self-titled. Everything else in the A tier is just stuff that you should listen to upon your journey through Maiden's discography. Now, for the top three, for the number 3 slot, that's where Killers is going to go. And it's going to go in the S tier, because Killers, for as great as the debut is, Killers is just a notch better. It built upon that debut in every satisfying manner. It's got this shredderific stage-setting opener with the Yards of March before marching into the incredible Wrathchild, a great razor-sharp rock tune that bleeds really well into Murders in the Rue Morgue. This is just a textbook example of a perfectly paced hard rock album. Killers. For everything that Number of the Beast and Power Slave do right to bring Dickinson into the band with Number of the Beast and expand upon what they were doing on Peace of Mind and Number of the Beast so well with Power Slave, Killers is that lean, all killer, no filler rock experience. You know, the fucking groove on Genghis Khan, the bass on In Exit Exile, and the title track. You know, this record in general is just a perfect 38-minute rock experience that I feel like if you're not starting with the self-titled debut, you need to start with Killers, because it is easily the best thing that could have come out of the Di'Anno era for, again, further shaping the band's sound and expanding on the debut in so many great ways. I think that it is catchy at points. It is just head-bangingly heavy at some points. It's got some great, just shreddy guitar stuff. Again, similarly to how their debut shaped the 80s, this just further cemented Maiden as a voice to be heard in that decade. There's a reason why so many metal bands look to them as an inspiration, and it's records like their debut and Killers that sort of laid that groundwork that I think is very important to the band as a whole. You know, it's what gave them character, and that's why I really respect the Paul Di'Anno era, but I also really admire the Paul Di'Anno era as far as quality fucking records. Now, my number 2, it's Beast. I'm more of a Power Slave guy. I really like Number of the Beast. I did a microdacted on it because I love this record, but it still feels weird to me that this album opens with Invaders. Invaders is a great song, you know, and it leads really well into Children of the Damned, but I just feel like the title track should be the first song on the record, you know. This record's singles are some of their biggest, you know, the title track, Run to the Hills, Hallowed Be Thy Name, all classic Maiden tunes, you know, but I feel like the deep cuts on here are just as good. 22 Acadia Avenue is fantastic. The Prisoner has just this bombast that just hits the listener like a cannonball in the way that I fucking love. You know, I think that Maiden is, similarly to Killers, just kind of textbook Dickinson Maiden. You know, it's big, it's bombastic, it's theatrical, it's got, you know, something it wants to say as well. It's a great record. You know, it's a classic. A lot of people view it as Maiden's best, and it's understandably so. It introduced Dickinson as a powerhouse within this band. I feel like the band are still firing off on, obviously, just some of the best cylinders, because, I mean, the instrumentation on this project is fantastic. Again, that bass work, Steve Harris is putting in that fucking work, man. He's laying the groundwork. He's laying that foundation so very well, and the band just builds upon it in all the right ways. The gravitas, the just everything. The scale is bigger, and justifiably so, because Dickinson's just that kind of bigger vocalist than Di'Anno, but it doesn't lose what made the Di'Anno era so good, which I think is what's magical about Number of the Beast, you know, because again, when bands get new vocalists, there's easily a point where they could just completely switch sounds into something different. While they've never done that in the pantheon of the career, I feel like they were trying with the Blaze era, whereas with Dickinson, they were still trying to expand in different ways. They were clearly aiming for the rafters more so than they were on Killers and the self-titled, but they didn't lose sight of that tightness that made Killers and their self-titled debut so very ear-catching, you know, so very attention-grabbing, you know, and that's what I think is important about Number of the Beast, is that the band didn't lose their identity and instead built upon it in fantastic ways. You know, Gangland and Invaders both sound like they could have fit on Killers themselves. They just have Dickinson as the vocalist, so the scale just feels upped a bit more. You know, again, Number of the Beast, clearly it's a classic. Obviously, it's my second favorite Maiden record, and it's obviously, if you're not starting with Killers, you should probably start with Number of the Beast and then go back to Killers. Here's the thing. If you start with Number of the Beast, that's fine. Dickinson's still their vocalist. He's the vocalist that's had the most prominence in the band, and I understand that. But don't sleep on Killers or their debut. If there's anything you walk away from with this, and I'm only saying this because there are still people that have never listened to Iron Maiden that are probably watching this review for some sort of overall analysis of the discography. And Number of the Beast is classic. You all know that. You all know this record is beloved by so many people. But Killers and their self-titled are also equally fantastic. Killers, as much so as Number of the Beast, for, again, just being a kick-ass rock album. I digress. Number of the Beast, you know it's great. You know why it's great. Similarly so, you probably know why Power Slave is great. You know, there's always that sort of debate between Maiden fans, which is better, Number of the Beast or Power Slave. And I'm just more of a Power Slave guy. I feel like they built upon the grandiosity that started on Number of the Beast and flourished out more on Peace of Mind, all the better on Power Slave. You know, similarly to the debuts, 1-2 Punch of Prowler and Remember Tomorrow, Aces High and 2 Minutes to Midnight are easily two of the best Dickinson-era songs, and they're what opened this record. You've got the twin guitar stuff like on Flesh of the Blade and The Duelist that feel much more of a prominent focus. You've got an epic in the form of Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, a sprawling, bigger song that saw them pushing their sonic construction boundaries and all in so many gratifying ways. I feel like Lost for Words and Back in the Village just add more of that razor-sharp vintage Maiden style in the pocket so very well. I think the title track is another big epic tune that just hits the rafters so successfully. Power Slave is a perfect rock album. For the minor complaint I have for Number of the Beast, I can understand why it's somebody's favorite. And Killers is just, again, a lean as fuck rock experience that I feel like Power Slave supersedes, if only because its grand scale is so perfectly executed. You know, for all of the progressive ideals they toy with, especially in the 2000s and 2010s work, Power Slave just did it better. It laid that foundation for the Dickinson era to continue to experiment with, like on Somewhere in Time, Seventh Son, and Fear of the Dark, but it just laid that foundation so very well. It expands upon, while shifts in all the ways that a new record should in a band's catalog, while also seemingly being their best. And I feel like, while it's not necessarily a good starting point, it is absolutely a point you need to listen to after whether the Diano era into Number of the Beast, it should follow Number of the Beast, or just listening through them in order, you should get to Power Slave eventually. I don't think it's a good starting point, but I do think it is the best example of what they could have ever hoped to achieve as a band, Dickinson or otherwise. Power Slave is everything I like about Iron Maiden in one concise package, and that's why, and it's paced perfectly, and that's why it's my favorite Maiden record. You know what I mean? But that's my thoughts. That's my Iron Maiden discography review. That's how I'd rank their records. What do you think of my ranking? Do you like what I had to say? Do you not? Let me know in those comments down below. I'm going to make myself a little bit bigger here. What's your favorite Maiden record? You know, what are your favorite Maiden songs? What's your favorite era of Iron Maiden? Let me know in the comments down below. If you did like this Discography Review DX, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and channel nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons. If you want to join the ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content, or to help drive the community, it's linked in the description. Thank you so very much for watching. Today, the day that this is going live, marks my Channelversary. I uploaded my first video on this channel back in 2009, which is 12 years ago. Thank you all for joining me on this journey. Obviously, I'm not done making videos, but I just wanted to take a little segment of today to just thank you all for hanging out with me all these years, you know, for coming to see what I have to say about music, video games, or other general nerdery content. This was a fun review to make. I really like Iron Maiden. They're not like my favorite metal band, but they've made some of my favorite metal albums. And case in point, the S and A tier of this list. And I feel like they're one of those bands that it's always surprising when people tell me they haven't listened to them, but I can understand, given just how many records they have, it could seem like it's a hard place to start. And I hope that you found that through this review. I hope that you continue to stick around to see my future reviews and other things that I have in store. Next year, I'll have a lot of fun, as always, some fun new ideas, but I hope that you stick with me through the rest of the year as well. I'll be going live tonight on the channel. I won't be on Twitch because it's the Channelversary, so I'll be live tonight. Swing by. It should be about 10:45 EST. I'll be hopping on here and playing some games. I'll probably play some Star Fox 64 because that was the first game I did a Let's Play of, and maybe some other stuff. But either way, thank you again for watching. If you like this video and you want to see more and you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe. You know, like I said, I've been doing this for 12 years now. I make a lot of videos. I make a lot of content. So if you want just a content hub, I'm your guy. I'm going to get out of here, though. Thank you again so very much for watching now and throughout the years.
Thank you again for your support. I have been a Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations. And I'll see you another day.